views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85 of the New York City Charter, a meeting of the Bronx Borough Board meeting will be held on Thursday, June 21st, 2008, today at 9:15-ish a.m. This meeting will take place at 851 Grand Concourse, room 819. And so we have a couple of items we have 3 items and presentations on our agenda today. And so we're just gonna jump right in. We're gonna have the first presentation from We Live NYC, presentation by Maggie Carey, Director of Government Affairs, and Lulu Mickelson, Fair Housing Engagement Manager, Neighborhood Strategies, Housing Preservation and Development. Thank you so much for stepping in.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay through this?
Yeah.
Okay. So actually this morning we have myself, again, James Rather, from City Planning Bronx office. Joining me is Jackie Sunwoo from our Housing, Economic and Infrastructure Planning Division downtown. Sorry, just to repeat,
Okay.
Joining me here is my colleague Jackie Sunwoo from our Housing, Economic and Infrastructure Planning Division. And we're here to discuss the M1 Hotel Tax Amendment. So folks have heard this already, of course, by now.
Excuse me, James. So
Yeah.
just so that you know, the mic is for the television so that you can be heard. So just project, even though
Okay.
the mic is there, and that's
Sure.
for the room.
Understood.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So, yeah, again, we're here to discuss the M1 Hotel Text Amendment. We have presented this multiple times to the community boards at this point. Folks have heard this. We are within our 60-day review window, which will be ending July 2nd. So we wanted to make sure to come here to Borough Board to also present to folks here. So Jackie is going to present, and once the presentation is over, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to speak as loudly as possible. I'm not Carol, I'm Jackie from the Department of City Planning. So I'm here to present a new city-wide zoning tax amendment that we're proposing that would set forth a requirement for a city planning commission special permit for new hotels in light manufacturing districts or M1 districts. We've seen a lot of new hotels open in these areas in recent years, and we understand that they've generated some concerns amongst the communities. So we at the Department of City Planning are also concerned about balancing neighborhood growth, which is why we're taking action now. So you may remember You may remember first hearing about a hotel special permit in the mayor's 10-point industrial action plan in 2015. The plan included a policy goal for the creation of a special permit for new hotels in industrial business zones, or IBZs only. Industrial business zones include all of M1, M2, and M3 districts, but only contain a small portion of the M1s. So as we were studying the issue, we found that there was a broader set of concerns that affected all M1 districts, not just the IBZs. So the proposal that I'm presenting today is for all of the M1 districts. As you're probably already aware, M1 districts are very widely mapped throughout the city, and they can range from areas that are still there's still heavy industrial activity to the more mixed-use districts. With New York City's unprecedented growth in population and the economy, there's been increased competition for land, and M1 districts have really become one of the last areas of opportunity in the city. But the rules regulating land use and development in M1 districts have changed very little since 1961, and one of these rules are regarding hotel development in M1 districts. So although unintended, the zoning in M1 districts work very well for hotels. So as you can see on this slide here, hotels have the ability to have very tall buildings because they have the ability to use all of the floor area ratio, or FAR. The height and setback regulations also allow for tower development for hotels. Furthermore, because hotels don't necessarily need larger floor plates compared to other uses, they can work as infill developments in M1 districts. And lastly, parking and loading requirements are very generous for hotels, which make these sites very attractive for hotels. However, hotels do present some conflicts in manufacturing districts. So in the more actively industrial areas, many businesses generate noise, truck traffic loading, pollution, and other nuisance that can conflict with hotels. For instance, street loading and open manufacturing uses can create very dangerous pedestrian experience and present safety concerns. Hotels could also harm the efficiency of the surrounding businesses because, for instance, hotel guests could complain about these activities. And as you can see from the slide and perhaps from your own experience, they often tend to be physically out of context as well. So in the more mixed-use M1 districts, hotels don't necessarily present the same land use conflicts, but they typically have, because they typically have less industrial uses and more retail, office, and in some instances even residential. But hotel development can detract from opportunities for other uses and could result in neighborhood growth that is oriented more towards the tourists than the community's needs themselves. Furthermore, again, the design of the hotels is often out of context and doesn't really contribute to the pedestrian experience. So for all of these reasons, the Department of City Planning is proposing a zoning text amendment to establish a City Planning Commission special permit for new hotels, motels, tourist cabins, and botels in light manufacturing districts. The tourism industry is certainly essential to New York City's economy and has had positive impacts to the city with new jobs and support for other industries such as restaurants or cultural institutions. And because hotel and tourism industry is important, it would be impractical to have all new hotels citywide to have to go through a special permit process. For light manufacturing districts, though, this case-by-case, site-specific review process would actually let everyone consider the appropriateness of hotels in light manufacturing districts. So, as I said before, in the more actively industrial areas, this would identify where hotels and existing uses are potentially incompatible, and in the more mixed-use areas, evaluate if the city wants to direct growth towards other sectors and have more balanced neighborhood growth. Moreover, a City Planning Commission special permit would still allow for hotels when it is deemed appropriate. Finally, here is a map of the Bronx. Orange are the areas where the proposed special permit would apply. And in light blue are the areas where hotels would still be permitted as of right. And the purple or dark blue strip right there is the Jerome Avenue Special Districts. And this area already has its own hotel special permit, so this proposal here wouldn't apply there. I know you guys have a black and white copy, but I believe we have a few copies of the color maps as well, so we can circulate that around if you can't see it too well on the slide here. In the areas affected by the proposal, which were in orange, new transient hotels will be permitted only by a CTC special permit from now on. And in doing so, the Commission must find the following things. First, that the proposed site plan for the project shows that it'll minimize potential conflicts between the hotel and its adjacent uses. Second, that the hotel will not cause undue traffic and congestion in the area. And lastly, that the proposed project will not impair the character of the surrounding area. Furthermore, hotels existing on the date of adoption of the text will be considered conforming use. Enlargements of a hotel use beyond an additional 20% of the floor area on the zoning lot would actually have to go through a CPC special permit. There are also some vesting provisions in place. A hotel development that had a building permit or a partial permit issued by the Department of Buildings by the date of referral, which was April 23rd, were vested. From the date of adoption of the text, however, these projects have 3 years to either complete construction or receive a certificate of occupancy from DOB. In regards to temporary housing facilities for the homeless that fall under the definition of a transient hotel, city policy will remain as it is today. This means that they will continue to be permitted as of right in M1 districts to provide the city with needed flexibility to meet ongoing sheltering needs. Just to explain the process a little bit, if this proposal is enacted, every new commercial hotel that goes into an M district would have to go through a special permit. And this includes a full Euler process with the community board review, borough president review, city planning commission, and usually the council also votes on it. And the total length of the process is typically 2 years. So that concludes my presentation, and we'll take any questions that you guys may have.
Community Board 2 has a large amount.
Sorry?
Community Board 2 has a large amount of area that this is being proposed for. And we voted on this, I think it was last week.
Which board is it? Sorry.
Board 2.
Oh, okay.
And however, what we also were scared about is that, though it's a 2-year process, there's not going to be any homelessness being put in, homeless families being put into these hotels.
After they go through a special permit process, we do see that as highly unlikely because going through a 2-year process, it actually how do I say this? They have to have the financing and the stomach to kind of go through the expensive and lengthy process. So these speculative hotels that we're talking about, it'll minimize any potential for those.
Why also, if you're really concerned about these industrial areas, why didn't you also add on any shelters into those particular districts?
Into this proposal?
Yes. In other words, them requiring to go through the same process as the hotels
Right.
to get the special permits and everything for this.
Right. So this proposal here was based on land use concerns for commercial hotels, and it stands aside from DHS's policies regarding homeless shelters. And unfortunately, there is a very chronic need to shelter the homeless population, and we're unfortunately not the owners of that policy. Oh, sorry. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not the owners of the DHS's policies of citing these facilities, and this was geared more towards the commercial hotels and stands aside from that.
No, my question is, why was, if you're putting all of these other restrictions onto the permit, why didn't you put homeless shelters into it if you want to preserve what's there and you don't want to create a condition that's beyond control?
I just wanna-
So it sounds like, are you asking if the rationale is preserving these parcels of land and preventing the land use conflicts that would also apply to shelters as well, in
Yeah,
addition to just commercial hotels?
What I've noticed now in Community Board 2, there are some groups looking at the warehouses to create shelters in there.
In warehouses?
Yeah, they just got to go in there and change the facade inside, put up walls and everything, and that's it.
Okay,
So
Mr.
if-
Presto,
so-
I think that we want to keep focused on the text amendment that they're speaking about right now. I understand your concern, but what they're saying is it's not applicable to the text amendment today.
Madam Chair, just so for the record, Community
Yes.
Board 2 also, when they voted on this, placed an amendment, placed a stipulation on this concerned with the homeless shelters.
Thank you for the record. And Mr. Hall.
Hi, Bill Hall, Ward 12. We have a problem with Ward 12. A lot of the hotels are becoming transient and becoming homeless shelter. They're trying to make them develop into homeless shelters. Does the text amendment give the community board additional authority to make a decision on whether a hotel is permitted to develop in the area?
Yeah, if you're talking about commercial hotels, the special permit process actually allows for community board review. So you guys will have a chance to weigh into any new commercial hotel that is going in your neighborhood. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Falk.
Yeah, my question is, do you think that there would be some developers that might say that we're building this as a public purpose in order to avoid the ULURP process?
Oh no,
What protection
if
would...
they let's say they want to go in as a public purpose hotel first and want to convert back into a commercial hotel, they would actually have to go
They would have
through
to go
a
back to
special
the ULURP?
permit. Yeah, process.
Yes, I'm
Jean Hill, Community Board 7. So you did a presentation at Community Board 7. We have just a small area of where these hotels could be built. But one of our concerns was that we don't want to see an illicit hotel come into that area. So, do you know what I mean by illicit hotel?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm keeping that clean. So, what is the criteria that would say that they come in, they're telling us they're building a regular hotel, because we do need hotels in the Bronx, but now all of a sudden it becomes the type of hotel that is not family oriented.
Right.
Is there a safeguard against that?
First of all, I believe the special permit process allows for these speculative or illicit hotels that you're talking about to be minimized, because they need the financing, they need the stomach to actually go through the special permit process, which is not always possible for these kind of hotels that you're talking about. So that is the first criteria that would kind of eliminate that. And second of all, the findings that we have in the special permit process actually allows for you guys to weigh in and the City Planning Commission to actually see if these are appropriate sites for legitimate hotels to go in that is actually built into the fabric of the neighborhood. So we would have to assess if the neighborhood character, if there's enough services for the hotels and the tenants that go into that neighborhood, that it would not cause any traffic congestion for the families around. So I think the findings that we're putting into the special permit provision actually alleviates a lot of your concerns.
James.
Thank you for coming in, and the planning office, Borough President, has been able to have 2 presentations on this, so thank you for that. This is an issue that the Borough President's been talking about for many years now. He was one of the first, if not the first elected official to request a special permit, monitoring hotel development in the borough, or just throughout the city, I should say. And while it's laudable that you're addressing issues regarding speculative and potentially illicit hotel development from being built in M1 zones and thus taking valuable land away from manufacturing zones, I have to echo Chair Crespo's concern just regarding shelters. What we have found since we issue the borough's house number addresses for every single building that in the borough, what we found is that folks who come in want to register as a commercial hotel, and then at the end of the day just saying, oh look, we have a contract to become a homeless shelter. And while our discussions, have talked about saying, well, this wouldn't encourage that, but if I'm that actor, that player coming in saying, well, I'm not going to go through city planning's process, and I'm just going to be upfront and just start opening homeless shelters because it's easier and it's more lucrative to do so. So while during the conversations that we've had, you've mentioned that this is not necessarily the right purpose to look at transient hotels for public use and to monitor that. Whereas a lot of us see it as another check and balance because the notification process from DHS hasn't always been effective. And saying that, well, DHS has its own siting process, so city planning shouldn't chime in on that. HPD has its siting process for affordable housing, EDC, as for community facilities and economic development. So just saying that, well, we can't have a say as city planning over the siting of DHS facilities is a bit confusing. And so I would like you to be able to tell the borough board why you think that homeless shelters should not be, considered under this special permit process.
If I think they should be part of the special permit process?
No, what I'm asking is that it will be exempt from review for the special permit process, and in conversations that you've had with our office saying that this is not the right process for that, just please explain to the borough board why this process would not be appropriate for review of a public transient hotel for public use.
Yeah, so, all right. So I understand what you're saying, James, regarding that if we are proposing this for commercial hotels, does the rationale also apply to shelters? And I know you've said before that this would give, if this were to apply for shelters, it would give us a chance to give the shelters the same sort of review that you would give a commercial hotel. The only answer I can give is that the city wants to retain that flexibility to be able to, in the event of an emergency housing need for homeless folks, to be able to house them quickly. And that's the only answer I have.
Okay. Because we see this as, if there is another process to help monitor shelter siting, we would encourage that and like to see that, but the concern and fear is the fact that to get to this point where we are right now with the special permit for hotels in general is the concern that, it'll be years and years before it's considered, if at all. And what we see it as, another opportunity not to necessarily prevent homeless shelters from being constructed. Councilmember Cohen was able to successfully recite through his advocacy a homeless shelter in Norwood from one side of the neighborhood to another to a more appropriate site that did not face a public school, which was a concern for the community. And so this gives, this just gives more opportunity for the public to be able to chime in, or council member or community board to chime in if it's more part of the public process, instead of council member trying to last minute rally and advocate successfully in this case, but not in every single case to do so. It's just being able to place a larger magnifying glass on where shelters are sited and be able to work with the community more in that.
Mr. Hall.
Language in the text amendment strong enough to prevent transient hotels to be developed after they've been approved to be a commercial hotel. I guess, is that what we're saying? Pretty much?
That sounds like a second issue, that you're talking about conversions after the fact, like years down the line.
Well, what's happening in our area is that these hotels are being reverted, as the gentleman said, because the profit margin is much higher. And this is what the issue we're having. So we just want to make sure this text amendment is going to be a regulatory guidance.
I would say that if they're going to go through this process, as Jack mentioned, that if they're going to go through the, I wouldn't say arduous, but definitely an involved process to get the special permit, that they're going to be a viable commercial hotel for at least some length of time. 5, 10 years, 20 years from now, can't really say about what might happen. DHS could offer them a contract. That's a loophole, but it's also by design.
And that's a problem because it's happening after 2 years.
But if anything, if a commercial hotel already went through the special permit process, you already had to weigh in on the siting process of that commercial hotel. So the so-called bait and switch that's happening right now, where a hotel just goes in and you don't know where the hotel was sited and now you see a homeless facility, the bait and switch won't happen because you'll know where the commercial hotel is actually going in and you'll have a say in it. Yeah.
Well, isn't this like kicking the can? Because it's it's not bait and switch tomorrow, but it's bait and switch in 10 years, which is still the same thing going on. You can't guarantee that great intentions that go into citing these hotels, and a hotel developer may feel we're going to make, tons of money, and in 10 years that's not the case, and then they turn over to a more lucrative source of business, be it illicit or sheltering. I think that you're saying, well, we have no way of knowing that, and we're saying we know that.
Right. And
So-
I mean, you're right. Like, I can't guarantee that, and I can't speak on behalf of the hotel operator or DHS for that matter. But I really do think that this is a step in a good direction, because at least for the commercial hotels that you guys are concerned about too, the community will have a say in where it's actually going to go in, and the qualifications for those hotels.
So what I'm hearing is that we should consider if we want a shelter in this place in 10 years, because the consideration is this is likely, or the community knows it's likely to happen. So when you're looking at a new hotel, you should consider whether this is the perfect place for a shelter.
No, I wouldn't say necessarily. The possibility, while it does exist, that DHS has stated that they are looking to get away from the conversions, that their goal is the purpose-built facilities going forward, because the conversions don't suit their needs very well. The floor plates don't suit their needs, the internal layouts don't suit their needs. So they're trying to get away from that.
I think that it's difficult to ask the board to negate its own experience over years. There are hundreds of years of community experience in this room, and it's difficult to ask the board to negate that experience and overlay it with this hopefulness that has happened in the past and perhaps been burned in different scenarios. So if I could just speak in general terms, I think we're looking to see something more, something that has more teeth, that says this will not happen. And I think that responsibly we're saying we know that this is going to happen. We have a feeling that's based on history and frankly logic. What can we do to give more teeth to a special permit that will, really significantly allay the concerns of the board?
We totally understand the concern, and it's concerns that we've heard not only in the Bronx and other areas as well. And this proposal here, I want to say, would not be the best avenue to really address the homeless shelter issues. And I'm happy, we're in constant communication with DHS actually, and I'm happy to put you guys in contact with someone from there. DHS actually communicated with us that they're really trying to do more outreach and reaching out to communities and really notifying the communities better regarding shelter options. So they have a district manager just for the Bronx. So I can get you guys in touch with them, and the concerns
I
regarding
think
the
we
siting
know
options.
how to reach those
Yeah.
folks.
So I mean, those concerns I wish I could best answer, but this proposal here stands aside from the homeless shelter siting issues.
Okay, I think that presumably you would want that to be true, that it stands aside from those issues. But if those issues weren't prevalent, then perhaps it could stand alone. It just doesn't, in terms of all of the concerns that you hear. I don't want to dominate the. Is there any?
I'm just wondering, would it be appropriate for us to formally vote our point of view based on some of the comments that Mr. Rouse made?
I'm sorry, I didn't
To
hear.
actually take a vote? No?
We're not voting tonight.
All the boards have not voted at their votes yet.
This is a presentation.
So this will come to some more. The reason I'm saying that is that there was an opinion expressed to say that this was a reservation, or we should do that at the time of the vote.
Right, because each of the boards have to present their board's vote.
It's a little premature. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. You have to stand and get closer to the mic.
Good morning, everybody. And I'm sorry if I asked a question that's been answered because it's really hard for me to hear. But I was wondering, since hotels now are going to be required for this amendment to go through a ULURP process, is there anything in this amendment or extant rules that would prohibit the community board's letter of support being contingent on a prohibition of any of the rooms being used as shelter space? Could we make a letter of support contingent upon a prohibition of shelter-like uses?
I honestly don't have an answer to that right now. I can get back to you on that after checking.
So do you mean something built into the text? Into the, do you mean something built into the text as far as when the, I'm just trying to think through how this would work. So through the special permit process, that there would be something in the conditions, in the considerations for the special permit that would require the community board to have a letter to, if they were to, can you kind of walk me through your thinking?
What I would like is clarity that in the amendment as proposed, there would be nothing that would inhibit the board's voting of a letter of support being contingent upon a prohibition of use.
That would be on you. That would be that's your prerogative. That would be as a board. Yeah.
Yes, Rosie.
Just very quickly, to
Yes.
follow up on the question you just raised, I think the important issue is, would city planning accept it as a restriction? Of course, the community board can say this is our preference.
Yeah,
Would
right.
city planning accept it as a restriction on the special permit? That's really, I don't want to, okay. That's the question. Would city planning accept it as a restriction on the special permit?
It would ultimately be the City Planning Commission who would
Is it
consider.
something that city planning, I'll ask one more. Is it something that city planning commission would consider?
Yeah, they consider all the letters that come in, all the support or anticipations.
But as far as would there be a different process for this particular special permit, that we can't answer at this time.
Yes, Ms. Acevedo. Yes. Just step closer.
Yes. Do you have a number of permits that are going to be grandfathered in?
I can't think of the number on top of the head. In the Bronx, you mean, right?
Yes.
No, but we can get you the number.
Please.
That was like 70 citywide or something like that. Is it citywide?
No, it's less than that.
It's less than that. Yeah, we can get you those numbers. That data's out there.
Seeing no further questions, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to go to the voting item? No. Well, why don't we do this and then we assure nobody else? Okay. Who you want to have next? Okay, everyone, let's stay together. Now we'll go back to our previous announcement, presentation of Where We Live NYC. And we're going to have a presentation by Michael Sandler, Director of Neighborhood Planning and Office of Neighborhood Strategies.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Sandler. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Planning at the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I'm joined by Lacey Tauber from our intergovernmental team, and also Ted Weinstein and Kay Reel from our Bronx planning team who are sitting back here. So thanks for having us today. We're here to talk about Where We Live NYC, which is the City of New York's comprehensive fair housing planning process. So we'll talk about First, we'll give a little context on what we mean when we say fair housing. We'll talk about what we're hoping to achieve through the process, and then how we plan to engage with New York City residents and yourselves as part of this process. And then following the presentation, we'll have time for Q&A. So first, when we say fair housing, what are we talking about? The Federal Fair Housing Act, which has its roots in civil rights era activism of the 1960s, was created to protect people from discrimination when they're renting, buying, or securing financing for housing. The Act specifically prohibits discrimination based on 7 protected classes. Those are race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and the presence of children. New York State and New York City's human rights laws also include additional protections based on things like your source of income, your age, sexual orientation, military status, and others, just to give a few examples. The Fair Housing Act also requires jurisdictions who receive federal funding from HUD, which is us, the City of New York receives a lot of funding from HUD, to affirmatively further the Act's goals. But until recently, it was not made very clear what affirmatively furthering the Fair Housing Act goals actually meant in practice. So that changed. In 2015, the Obama administration clarified what it meant to affirmatively further fair housing. They issued a new rule articulating the responsibilities of jurisdictions to affirmatively further fair housing, which we often refer to as AFFH. You know, New York City government, we love acronyms. So HUD now says that jurisdictions, cities, towns, counties, or states must do more than simply prevent discrimination. They must take affirmative, proactive steps to overcome segregation and disparities in accessing opportunity. So this means, and this is quotes, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, and transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. In general, HUD outlines a range of strategies that fall into 2 categories for how you would achieve affirmatively furthering fair housing. We refer to these sort of 2 different tracks as a balanced approach. So this means first looking at mobility strategies, which is how are we creating or preserving affordable housing in areas that are high opportunity, where residents would have access to opportunity by moving to those areas. And then on the other hand, we also consider place-based strategies, which is how can we increase opportunity in areas that lack it through broader community revitalization efforts, including investments in affordable housing, but also investments in education, transit, or other amenities that neighborhoods might lack. So what is Where We Live NYC? First, we know that opportunity is not shared by all New Yorkers. Where we live impacts our access to jobs, to education, to safety, to public transit, and to positive health outcomes. These disparities are in many ways due to our nation's legacy of discrimination and segregation. So Where We Live NYC is our process to study, understand, and address patterns of residential segregation and concentrated poverty, and how those patterns impact New Yorkers' access to opportunity. The process is being led by HPD in close partnership with NYCHA and in collaboration with residents, community leaders, service providers, advocates, and other government partners. And it was going to culminate in the release of a public report in 2019 that includes measurable goals and strategies, and I'll talk a little bit more later about what goals and strategies might mean. So as part of Where We Live NYC, HPD is leading a public engagement process that we've broken out into 3 phases, which you'll see here. Right now we're in what we call the learn phase. This phase sets the groundwork for the planning process. It's an opportunity for us to understand what fair housing challenges look like in New York City, engage with data and understand existing conditions, and identify what are the key factors that contribute to segregated living patterns in New York City, both historic and current. So this is happening now, spring and summer. In the fall is what we're going to call our create phase, which is an opportunity to surface ideas for policy solutions. So based on those existing conditions that we've established, what do our stakeholders, what do New Yorkers, and what do our government partners think are ways that we can fix those issues that we've identified? And then finally, in 2019, we'll have our finalized phase, which is where we'll share back an initial policy framework for comment and ideas on what needs to be changed, what is missing from that policy framework. And it'll be the public's opportunity to let us know what we got right and what they feel should be included that we did not include. The engagement strategy involves learning directly from New Yorkers through focus group style meetings and large public workshops. We've also convened a stakeholder group comprised of community leaders, service providers, academic researchers, and advocates who are meeting to provide their professional perspective on these issues as well. And finally, we'll be engaging elected officials, members of the NYCHA Resident Advisory Board throughout the process, as well as community boards. So when we engage New Yorkers, what is it that we're trying to learn? We have 3 core sort of research questions that we want help from New Yorkers to answer. The idea is that these are things that we can't necessarily answer well from looking at data. We can't answer these by sitting at our desks. And so those questions is, why do New Yorkers live where they live? We want to understand the factors that contribute to housing and neighborhood choice, or in many cases, the lack of choice for New York City residents in what neighborhood they live in. We want to understand how does where a New Yorker live impact their life and their household's access to opportunity. And then finally, we want to understand what solutions do New Yorkers want to see, servicing what people don't like about their current housing situation or their neighborhood and how it could be better. And so at the heart of this is engagements that we're calling community conversations. These will be focus group style meetings with a specific population, a community, with a focus on populations that are protected by fair housing laws, as well as communities that are traditionally left out of government decision making. So for example, our outreach will focus on NYCHA residents or housing choice voucher holders, immigrants, people with disabilities, seniors, LGBTQ individuals, and individuals with different racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. These sessions will be led in partnership with community-based organizations, hosted by those community-based organizations with the help of our consultant, Hester Street, which is a nonprofit technical assistance provider. We're also working with the Interaction Institute for Social Change, which is a racial justice organization, to ensure that we're creating space to have meaningful conversations and productive conversations about fair housing issues and how that relates to race and discrimination, which can be tough topics to talk about in public settings. We'll also be launching a website in the next few weeks that will include a downloadable version of these community conversations that anyone can take part in. And we'll also be on the website project updates, fair housing and resources, and an opportunity to share feedback directly on that website. We'll also be hosting large public workshops. This is the key public participation element of this plan. Those will be later this year in the fall and into 2019. There'll be opportunities for us to report back on our findings from these focus groups, get feedback from residents about whether that feedback we've learned in the focus groups is accurate and jives with their experience, and hear from the public about what they want to see, and also educate the public about fair housing issues, about their rights, about the history of segregation in America and in New York City. And at those workshops, we'll be prioritizing goals and strategies that will go into the final report. So speaking of the final report, this is the culminating element of this project, is an extensive public document. We're taking bets on page length, but my guess is somewhere around 300 to 500 pages. So a very large public document. Will be also including some sort of summary that will be easy for New Yorkers to read. The final report will include extensive data and policy analysis, a summary of what we've learned through our public engagement, and concrete goals and strategies with a clear plan for tracking and accountability. What are these goals and strategies? So these are just as a reminder of that balanced approach that I mentioned at the beginning. The strategies will focus on this balanced approach. So mobility-based strategies to promote housing choice, access to high opportunity neighborhoods, and also public investments to ensure that opportunities are distributed equitably across the city. Goals and strategies will likely include some altogether new policies and programs, but we also expect them to focus on making tweaks to existing policies and programs to better address needs. And so this seems a little, just to make it a little tangible, I'll share a few examples of what other cities who've gone through similar processes has ended up with in their, as their goals and strategies, to give you an idea of the types of things that might be on the table. New York City's policies will be based on the needs of New York, though. So in Philadelphia, they're expanding support for Section 8 voucher holders to promote access to high opportunity areas in Philadelphia and in the broader region, including the suburbs, with a focus on households that have limited English proficiency and those with children. So this includes additional counseling, one-on-one help with voucher holders to find housing opportunities in areas that have high opportunity. In New Orleans, this strategy has included identifying vacant land in underserved communities to support affordable housing development, but also concrete goals for using that land for things like food access, recreation, and green space in those communities. They're also developing a formal plan to assess how banks are meeting their Community Reinvestment Act obligations. So that's sort of what they're doing in New Orleans. In Los Angeles, the plan included strategies to improve fair housing enforcement, like strengthening protections for transgender individuals and undocumented immigrants. These are just a few examples, but here in New York, we'll talk about what our needs are and what we can do to meet those needs. So right now, the City of New York is forging ahead with this process at a time where HUD and the federal government are really stepping back from these issues. We see New York as a national leader on this, and we also think that New York has a perspective that is different from other cities that might be grappling with segregation, because we are a high-cost city where issues like displacement and gentrification are also really high priorities. And so we see this as an opportunity to work with other cities to understand how these issues might relate to New York. And then also, we see this as a unique opportunity to move away from discussing individual development projects, move away from having a discussion with a city that's about a one ULURP or about a rezoning, and take a more comprehensive view about how discrimination and how the legacy of segregation impacts our lives today. So next steps, I'll talk about next steps and then we'll take some questions. So this summer, we'll be launching our full public website and the community conversations. We invite community boards to take part in those community conversations by downloading the tools and using them at your meetings, and we're available to support you in that effort if you're interested in taking part in that. And then this fall, we'll conduct a series of public workshops, and we'll continue to provide opportunities for public input throughout the submission of the report, which will be in the fall of 2019. We wanted to brief the Borough Board really early in this process. We have not started public engagement yet, so we're here to hear from you, to inform you about this process, and there'll be a ton of opportunities to weigh in over the course of the next year and a half, and I predict that we'll be back here to talk to you again throughout the process. So that's it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I can't remember his name. My question is, have you thought about partnering up with the DOE and sort of figuring out that there seems to be, I can't prove this to be a fact, but nice neighborhoods have nice schools. And sometimes folks don't have the option of going to nicer schools, and they are actually stuck going to the schools in their neighborhoods. Have you thought about having conversations and bringing the DOE in to sort of find out what resources are out there, what needs to be done to make schools more equitable as well?
Yeah, so that is a great question. The answer is yes. We're working actually very closely with the Department of Education. They're engaged in actually a similar effort around school segregation right now, which has been a multi-year process. It's been in the news a lot, so you've probably read about it or worked on it yourselves. And so we're working closely, one, to make sure that our effort that's looking at neighborhood segregation is complementary to their effort, which is looking at segregation within schools. And then this balanced approach. So we're going to be looking at strategies to increase opportunity for New Yorkers no matter where they live. And so that could include strategies to improve schools in areas where the schools are not good. So that we are working closely with DOE and a number of city agencies, close partners include the Department of Health, the Department of City Planning, to look at how land use patterns affect these issues, the mayor's office, various mayor's offices that are related to economic development, SBS, EDC, the Department of Consumer Affairs, and the list goes on, but a huge number of agencies. It really is a citywide, high priority project that will involve close collaboration with other agencies.
James.
For your presentation. So a couple of questions. First, could you clarify or just expound upon what constitutes a high opportunity area and as per this. And in terms of accountability goals, like who are you aiming to hold accountable, and will you be looking at practices of both brokers and landlords, because they have a major role in terms of where they show potential tenants and kind of foster more segregated communities by not showing certain apartments or certain areas to certain groups of people.
So your first question is about how we're measuring what is opportunity. We're looking at it in four buckets, and we're looking at a pretty wide range of indicators within each of those buckets. And then we also want to hear from New Yorkers what they consider to be opportunity and how they think about what their family needs and what they want. So the four sort of categories that we're looking at opportunity in is health outcomes, health equity, so just generally environment and health. Economic opportunity, so jobs, access to capital, access to banking and financial services, transportation, and education. And then your second question was about who are we holding accountable? So ultimately this effort is about holding the government of New York City accountable, but we'll be looking at what are the factors that cause segregated living patterns, what are the ongoing issues that continue to cause New Yorkers to live in segregated patterns. And you mentioned brokers, actions by private individuals, discriminatory actions, and so we'll be looking at what are those, how do those play out in New York, and then what is New York City doing to enforce fair housing law, because those actions by brokers is illegal under the Fair Housing Act, and so we'll be looking at what is New York City doing to keep those individuals behaving in a way that's legal, and how can we improve our enforcement of those actions.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
There's a couple more.
Mr. Hall? No.
I'm just wondering, I know you said the report will be out in 2019, but is there a time frame for restructuring, or is the objective to restructure, or are you just evaluating?
So the time frame for implementation of whatever the goals and strategies of the report will be ongoing. We anticipate that there'll be some strategies that are implemented in the short term, quick changes to policy to promote desegregation, to promote integration. And then the question is whether we are anticipating restructuring, which I think you mean integration, or what do we want to change in our living patterns. I think that I'll bring it back to the balanced approach. So it's about improving mobility, access to opportunity. So for New Yorkers that want to move to a neighborhood of their choice that has opportunity, that has good schools, we're going to be increasing our strategies to allow New Yorkers to do that and have that choice where maybe now that choice doesn't really exist, and then also increasing opportunity in neighborhoods that lack it.
Thank you.
You mentioned the Department of Transportation because that's an important piece. Ease of getting where you need to go. Ease of getting your children to good schools, or you being able to get the work. Now, the infrastructure is not up to date, okay? For a city the size of New York, our transportation structure is way behind Europe, which amazes me, being New York is one of the capital cities of the world. So how much of an investment are you putting in with the Department of Transportation saying, okay, you guys need to up your game?
So that's a great question. I can't disagree with anything that you said as a New Yorker who traveled here from Brooklyn today, which is why I was 15 minutes late, because it took almost 2 hours. So the ultimate goals and strategies of this report will be about increasing opportunity. I cannot say now if there's a dollar figure associated with transportation improvements or what those improvements might be. I think we'll be looking at how is the city spending its money now, so where are transportation improvements that are taking place, and how does that relate to segregated living patterns, and should there be a new lens of equity or a new lens that takes into account segregated living patterns when making those transportation investments. Does that answer your question? So I can't say now whether it's a certain amount of money or any specific project that'll come out of it.
But it is being looked at.
It is being looked at.
Mr. Crespo?
How you doing?
Great, good to see you.
My question is, that I see enforcement for like sort of new apartments being advertised to make sure that there's equal representation of community in there. But I don't hear how enforcement's going to be done for those that live in the present communities and things do not change. For instance, in Community Board 2, we have a lot of people that live with one income, which is that either SSI, SSD, whatever it may be, you know, and what this may end up happening is that the landlords are going to be forcing people out in order to up their rents and get newer people in there to get the rents that they want. I don't hear that enforcement in this.
So I'll say two things. Source of income is a protected characteristic under fair housing law, and so we are looking at how our fair housing law is being enforced. If source of income discrimination is discrimination, and it is protected by fair housing law. The other piece is that discrimination in the housing market certainly happens when you're looking for an apartment, and we know that that happens. But discrimination can also exist for a tenant in an apartment, and so if I'm a tenant and my neighbors are all getting new marble countertops and I'm not, there may be discrimination that is at play there. And so we're looking at discrimination in its many forms in the housing market, not just when you're looking to lease an apartment, but also when you're looking to keep an apartment or to live in a quality apartment.
But it also represents gentrification into the community.
Yes.
And as we all know, gentrification sometimes means that those poor seniors that live under one income are going to be possibly forced by their landlord. Because if a landlord can get $1,500, $1,800 on an apartment, and he's only getting $250 off of the senior, he's going to try and do whatever he can to make that person's life miserable and move them out.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what kind of enforcement is going to be done for that? Or what are you guys looking at to create enforcement for the protection of those seniors?
So I'm hearing that displacement is a really high priority issue for your community. I've been to your community board, and we've talked about strategies that we're doing now to prevent displacement. And so that's things that are happening right now. This is a 1.5 year project that will establish goals and strategies. So I can't say now what the goals and strategies will be because we want them to be informed by public participation. But we do know that segregation is a complicated issue in New York because of gentrification and displacement, and that efforts to desegregate a community could look a lot like gentrification. And so we understand that that is going to be an issue that we need to understand and deal with, and we want to hear from New Yorkers how we should be thinking about this issue in the context of gentrification and displacement.
Yeah, this is obviously a big issue, and the study is appreciated. I think we all feel like we know the answers, but it's good to study even the things that we think that we know. I wonder if you could just speak very quickly to piggyback Mr. Crespo's point of what is now going on in terms of discrimination, in terms of if you are experiencing some unfair housing practice and there is a discrimination, what are your steps to go through just for the public?
So the New York City Commission on Human Rights is a city agency that enforces fair housing law, and so in terms of fair housing, enforcing discrimination in the housing market, they are the place to go. New Yorkers can always call 311 if they think that they're experiencing discrimination. We also have a website dedicated to fair housing resources, which I think is nyc.gov/fairhousing, but I can follow up and confirm after this meeting, which is a repository of resources about discrimination enforcement, and what New Yorkers can do if they think that they are a victim of discrimination.
So apparently that We have another question.
Yeah. I was wondering, are you going to look at the just escaped me. The certificate of no harassment? Are you going to look at potential revisions to that law? Because it seems to me that its applicability is constrained. So I was wondering what kind of review you will do of that law in particular, how it can be expanded and reinforced, and any other potential legislative progress.
So this is an open process. We don't have predetermined goals and strategies. We will be looking at existing city policy that includes certification of no harassment, that includes many other city policies. The first step is to understand what are the problems that we're trying to solve for, what are the causes of segregated living patterns and disparities in access to opportunity, and then we'll be prioritizing goals and strategies and policy tweaks that fix those contributing factors. So the short answer is yes, we will be looking at that, but we'll also be looking at a wide range of things.
Yes.
Just to piggyback off what Mr. Brown was saying, you also have the HPD Landlord Ambassador Program that I think should be expanded throughout the borough. This is something that on our community board level, we've been strongly trying to advocate for more in our district, understanding that we have the Southern Boulevard study coming up, and we've identified potential landlords that could be in one way or another discriminating against our current residents. So we would love to see the ambassador program expanded into our district. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I will say the Landlord Ambassador Program is in your district. Also happy to hear that you like the program, and same answer to the previous question.
It's in our district, but we've never met with the provider for it. We've been kindly asking to reach out and to no avail. So.
We're actually looking for other groups that might be interested in doing the training, not necessarily associated with
Housing Ambassador.
Oh, no, I thought it was both. We do both.
No.
All right.
Would you two like some time alone?
Yes, I think we've talked specifically about landlord ambassadors. I thought we were setting up a meeting. If that hasn't happened, I apologize, and would like to make that happen. And just in terms of are we looking at expanding that program, I think the same answer as before. We're looking at a wide range of programs, and we're open to hearing from New Yorkers and from community boards, elected officials, what programs they think are helpful towards this effort and what programs they think need to be tweaked and changed to be more helpful.
This is the first time I've ever even heard of this ambassador program. So how much information about it are you putting out there?
So the Landlord Ambassador Program, I think, is something that we could set up another time to have the right team at HPD who could speak more intelligently about the program, come and speak to the Borough Board. It is a pilot program in a few neighborhoods right now that is technical assistance for landlords to enter into regulatory agreements with the city and improve the quality of the housing. But I think that's the limit of what I can say specifically about that program, and if you'd like to follow up, we'd be happy to follow up.
Well, you're always welcome to return. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, everyone, we're going to move very quickly into the next presentation, which is a voting item, and it's the ground lease for the development of the peninsula. You have the presentations in your folders, and we're going to hear from Mr. Charles Samboy, Assistant Vice President, Government and Community Relations for New York City Department of Economic Development Corporation. You should do a really huge favor. In my office, in the refrigerator, there's a bottle of one of those thermos. Would you bring it to me? Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Charlie Samboy, Assistant Vice President for Government Relations at EDC. I'm joined by Catherine Gray from the development team for the Peninsula. You see here a map of the site. It's, as many of you know, it is the former juvenile detention facility in Hunts Point, which we are very much excited to already be in demolition phase. And today we are here to seek your permission to enter into a lease with the development team, much like we did last month on the Edenwald YMCA. So I will quickly run through this. I know folks probably have the rest of the day, and we're happy to answer any questions that may come up. So this received council approval earlier this year, late last year, and we are here today to get the 384B4 approval, which essentially allows us to enter into a lease for the development. And we're thankful for Community Board 2 and for Councilmember Salamanca's support throughout this ULURP process. In terms of timing, the demolition of the building is already underway. It's a building that was built in the 1950s, so there's a significant amount of asbestos that's in the building. It's currently being remediated and removed, and we anticipate beginning physical demolition of the building later on this summer. We're happy to keep this borough board informed, and obviously our partners at CB2 and Salamanca's office. But we're looking at something in July, maybe early August, to have a celebration for this. The development will happen in several phases. Phase 1 being construction beginning next year, and subsequent phases happening after that. In total, it is 5 buildings across 3 phases, anticipated completion in 2023-ish. Assuming all things go as planned. So the Peninsula JV is the sort of corporate name of the development team that is comprised of Gilbane Development, as well as Hudson Companies and Mutual Housing Association of New York. We are entering into a 99-year lease with that development team for the 5 buildings. Each building will have a separate agreement and a separate lease. But it is one sort of complete transaction that allows for the entire project to happen. As I'll go into in a minute, essentially each phase is moving on to each phase is predicated on the previous phase being successfully completed. So right now the development team has a license that obligates them to fully demolish the building. Let's assume worst case scenario, they can't move on or something happens that development team can't move on to actually constructing the project. They still have a legal obligation to completely demolish the existing structure that is there today. Once they're done with phase 1, that includes 2 buildings, they can then move on to phase 2. And after phase 2 is complete, they can then move on to phase 3. So they have essentially legal obligation to demolish the building, and we have rights and responsibilities that allows us to prohibit them from moving forward should they not successfully complete, to our standards, one of the phases of the project. There is a nominal rent that they would pay to us that is essentially the cost of doing business with the city. As you know, affordable housing is not meant to generate revenue. We recapture that revenue into the project itself so that the development team can continue to provide affordable housing. There is a fair market rent component to the lease. Essentially, after the initial lease term is up and the initial regulatory agreement for the affordable housing, which in this case is 60 years, once that regulatory agreement is up, the city has the opportunity to charge them fair market rent. So I'm using this as an example, but let's say today they pay $1 a year for the next 60 years, they pay that to the city for rent. After 60 years, when their initial term is up and their initial regulatory agreement with HPD is up, for argument's sake, let's say the nominal rent, the fair market rent at that point is $300,000 a year. They have an incentive to re-up their regulatory agreement with HPD and with the city because they don't want to have to pay us $300,000 in rent. So that is the mechanism through which we and HB in a lot of ways extends affordability beyond current lease terms and beyond current regulatory agreements, and that is something that we are incorporating in this project. Another component is the non-residential uses generate revenue for the developer, and obviously we want to be able to recapture some of that value to continue to reinvest in the project and to continue to reinvest in the Hunts Point community. So there is a non-residential rent participation that we will collect after the 10th year as it's currently structured now. Any rent above $150,000 annually, we would sort of recapture a portion of that to be able to reinvest in the community, reinvest in the project, and use that as a way to fund the rest of the work that EDC and the city does in Hunts Point. In terms of requirements, as I mentioned, they have a requirement to transform the site into a mixed-use project, which includes 50,000 square feet of light industrial and 4 affordable housing, fully affordable housing buildings that have 740 units. As part of this, they will also deliver 50,000 square feet of community open space, which is open to not just the residents that will live there, but to the broader community as a whole. And they are also working with us to incorporate MWBE targets for this project that is 35%. Happy to say that their demolition contractor is a union contractor, and it's yet, and WBE as well. Yet to be determined on what the construction team is, but we're happy that we're getting off on the right foot with a union and a WBE firm. We actually just had a supplier event this past week, on Monday, I believe? No, sorry, last Friday. We had an event in the community, a number of WBE and MWBE firms, as well as others that are seeking certification, met with the development team to learn about how do they get, contracts for putting up sheetrock. How do they get contracts? Actually, I was on the site this Monday, and someone came up to a representative from Gilbane because they provide portable laboratories, and they want to see if there's a way that they can get involved in the project during the construction phase to provide portable laboratories. So this is a team that is committed to working with this community. Hudson is not a stranger to the Bronx. La Central is a project that they're working diligently with CB1. Mutual Housing Association is a project in Hunts Point that has had a good track record of developing projects, and they continue to have other projects, not just this project, and Gilbane is new to the New York scene, but we're happy to work with them to advance goals that are important to this community. Any questions on this, or should I wait to the end?
Wait to the end.
Okay, great. So you'll see here, essentially it's on 3-phase moving up from Tiffany, sort of northwestward towards Monida, but phase 1 will be 2 buildings. One of them will be completely commercial, about a 2-story building, and the second of the 2 buildings in phase 1 will be a mixed-use commercial and residential building. And the rest of the buildings are also sort of mixed-use commercial and residential. Of note here is that on phase 3, there's currently a Head Start facility, which the development team is mandated to relocate into phase 2 before they could proceed to demolish that building and move forward to create phase 3 of this project. And as you'll see throughout the phases, there is open space that is accessible to the entire community. This is sort of a breakdown of what the non-residential program looks like. Again, 50,000 square feet of light industrial, 15,000 square feet of commercial, and almost 54,000 square feet of community facility. Highlighted here is essentially the type of tenants that they are currently having conversations with to be tenants in the building. Many of them are MWBE. Nearly all of them already operate in the Bronx. So it's not as though they're going sort of outside of the Bronx or even outside of Hunts Point to seek potential tenants, but they're sourcing their tenants from within the community, and something that we're very excited about. The Point CDC, which a lot of you folks know, is excited to work on this project as well, not just as a prospective tenant, but as a community partner, as well as urban health plan. On the non-residential program, again, it's about 740 units. All of them fall under the affordable housing program. As currently stipulated, 50% of these will be sort of preference for CB2 residents. And the breakdown is here in terms of size of units, but there's a keen sort of awareness to provide 3 bedrooms and some number of 4 bedrooms for families that are much larger size, and something that we are, and the team is very cognizant of. Also of note is that 80% of the units fall under below the threshold of the 60% AMI band. So we're, I think this kind of dovetails into the previous conversation with HPD, but ensuring that we are providing affordable apartments not only to those at the lower spectrum of the income tier, but also affording opportunity for those youngsters and families that want to continue to live in the Bronx and that have done well and have done their job and going to school and doing everything that they have to. We want to make sure that the next generation also has the opportunity to continue to live in the community that they grew up in. And then the next few slides are just images of the development. Sort of this is looking up from Tiffany into what is at the lower portion, phase 1, and sort of towards the foreground is phase 2 and 3. This is a street view of that same corner. You'll see the commercial building, light industrial building on the foreground, and then in the background is the 4 other residential buildings. This is a view from Tiffany looking into one of the entrances between phase 1, the 2 phase 1 buildings. This is just the massing. I think the tallest building will be no taller than 16 stories. And given the slope on Tiffany Street, it will not seem as imposing as you would think a 16-story building is. But that is something that the development team, working in concert with the Point Urban North Plan, we're very sort of sensitive to what will the scale of a building, how would that feel for residents across the street? How will that feel for residents in the community that are walking around? So I know that in many communities, height is a concern, and that is something that the development team took into consideration as they were developing this site plan. Site plan again for phase 1, which is the first phase of the project that will be built. So I guess I'll leave it here in case folks have any questions. But again, I think we're excited to work with CB2. We're excited to work with the council member's office to help advance this project. And the borough president has also been instrumental in helping shape all things in Hunts Point, and we're very grateful for his support on this project. Thank you.
Any comments from CB2?
I want to thank EDC, Gilbane, and the development team. They've worked with us for the last 3 years. This has been 3 years of worth of work, and trying to put it together from what it originally was to what it is today. We're proud that we've been able to fight for 170 permanent jobs at that particular location, which will be from the stores and the bakery, maintenance jobs, the management. It's all going to be local, 170 jobs that they're looking at, and when we say local, borough-wide for the Bronx County, and 1,600 construction jobs. What we've been asking is that those 1,600 construction jobs be prevailing wages to union pay. It's not a union job, but they have reached out already to one union organization, which is also a WMB, if I'm not mistaken. And it's been a lot of work. But one of the things that we do have concerns with is to make sure that the 74 set-aside apartments that they have, which is going to be geared to DHS from what I understand, what Community Board 2 is asking is that those units be made to DHS, but for prior residents that lived in Community Board 2 that had unfortunately moved out of the community because of whatever situation got them to move out, and bring them back in to our community, which are friends to the community. So we've been asking about that. It's not been something approved, but it's part of the stipulations. We've put approximately 15 stipulations on this project, just to make sure that the community protection is in there. And we also really support the project, but there's still some concerns. But I think that Gilbane and the development team, together with EDC, we've been able to hash out everything, and I think we're meeting almost once a month already on this project. So we support the project, and I vote in favor of the project, but I hope that now we're voting with the project that people don't disappear, because you're only a stone's throw away from the office, and I'll be throwing boulders towards you guys. So we support it.
Thank you for those comments. And from Representative for Councilman Salamanca's office.
Good morning. My name is Shannon Knotts, Deputy Chief of Staff for Councilman Salamanca. Unfortunately, he couldn't be present with us today, but he did have a few remarks that he wanted to share, which is as follows. Good morning, Bronx Borough Board. I'm very excited that we're voting on the La Peninsula project in my district, breathing new life into the once notorious Spofford Juvenile Detention Facility. Thanks to you, leaders of the community, this $300 million project will inject serious capital and investments into the neighborhood. You advocated tirelessly to ensure this project thoughtfully incorporates the much-needed amenities to the neighborhood, and we got them. The 5-acre plan is comprised of 740 affordable units with rents as low as $396 per month, 54,000 square feet of open and recreational space, 14,000 square feet of fenced green space, 49,000 square feet of light industrial space, 48,000 square feet of community facility space, and 21,000 square feet of commercial and retail space. The site will also feature a food step-up space for local entrepreneurs, a 15,000 square foot early childhood education facility, and an 18,000 square foot health and wellness center operated by Urban Health Plan. The Peninsula will be a transformative project for Hunts Point and the South Bronx, adding 100% affordable housing and new jobs while spurring economic growth. I urge each of you to vote in favor of this project today. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the board? So-called unaffected.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair. I'm really impressed with the fact that at this stage of development, you've secured a number of jobs in your community that they will be working on that project. So that's commendable.
Thank you.
Okay, so hearing no more comments, I am open for a motion.
Motion to accept the application for the La Peninsula.
And
With the
second.
stipulations by Board 2.
I second that.
Okay, thank you. There's been a motion and a second, and we'll take a vote. They will be the voting city council and the affected community board, and we'll do it by roll call. Councilwoman Ayala's office.
We vote yes.
And Councilman Cohen.
Cohen votes yes.
And Councilman King.
Councilmember King votes yes.
Councilman Cabrera.
Yes.
Councilman Torres.
Yes.
Councilwoman Gibson.
Yes.
Councilman Salamanca.
Yes.
And Councilman Diaz Sr.
Yes.
And CB 12. 2.
CB2 votes yes.
It's my favorite district, and we already know. Sorry.
It's okay, Madam Chair. We vote yes.
Okay. The motion carries. And the borough president votes yes. Thank you. You can clap now. I want to thank you, Mr. Samboy, for your presentation. I feel like I see you monthly, so maybe there's something else coming up next month.
Let's see.
And before we release ourselves from this very productive meeting, I just want to extend an invitation to the Borough President's Caribbean Heritage event, which is actually today, right after this. So if you're ready for lunch, you can come with us to R&J Banquet Hall at 1554 Minford Place. And we'll be serving lunch and wonderful Caribbean delicacies. And we will be honoring a few of our communities, our citywide electeds and our community folk at this event. So we'll do that. We want to take a moment and thank our outgoing chair of CB6, Wendy Rodriguez. Now, the papers I have here says over 30 years of service, but you look only 31, so maybe started from in utero, I guess. Would you have any comments for the board?
It's been a pleasure working, with so many years. And I'll continue working in the community anyways.
Good, thank you. Well, clearly, community service keeps you young. Are there any additional announcements from the board? Or we did not formally. During the introductions, we did give a little bit of a strong hello and to our new chair, Ms. Hill, from the Community Board 7. So we want to give a round of applause and a warm welcome to Ms. Hill. And also the new DM for Community Board 8. And
we sent her to work.
No rest for the new or weary.
We are very delighted to have her, and I think she'll be a wonderful addition to this group. I think everyone will enjoy working with her.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So I think that's it. We are adjourned.